Before we can learn to squat better, we need to learn to hinge better. And before we can learn to hinge better, we need to learn to stabilize the lumbar spine. So you can do this exercise with 2 kettlebells if you don't know what your weaker side is. I know my left side is weaker, so I'm going to focus on holding that kettlebell or any dumbbell weight you got just away from the thigh. We have the big toes together and the heels a little bit apart. My right hand there is in the measuring stick position, just to remind me to lengthen. That's what we're talking about, stabilizing that lumbar spine, which is lengthening it, opening up the disc spaces, the facet spaces, driving up. What I'm doing there with the head is I'm squeezing my glutes as I'm driving my neck up. We're stretching the upper traps and the SCM muscles, which pull on the back of the skull. So we're really holding that spine, the whole spine, not just the lumbar spine, in a decompressed state, really only working the cervical curve there, and then the glutes pulling your tailbone, your sacrum down at the same time. We're going to maintain that inner thigh squeeze that whole time. All right, here's a half press into a squat, but it's a very hinge-centric squat. So you're holding that hinge, squatting, hinge, squatting. When you're first finding this position, you might feel like you're falling backwards, just like that. That's where you want to be. You want to be weighted in the heels, and that's why we hinge first, then squat. This is something you could practice on the daily. You could add the hinge first and then transition to the squat. You're going to feel it a lot more in your hips. It might feel rigid, and it kind of should. We're trying to maintain everything we did from the first exercise, that lengthened lumbar spine, driving into that hinge. So here we're doing a curl, hinge, squat. So as you lay the bell down, you're going into the hinge position, then the squat position. Doing 10 with the elbows outside the knees, so the knees are driving into the elbows, and then we're going to reverse that. You can see those toes coming up that same way. You don't want the toes to come up, but it's just showing you that's where your weight should be transitioning. So after those 10, we're going to flip it, where your elbows are inside your knees. Same exercise, it's just going to change the dynamic a little bit. You're going to challenge the adductors now to pull in. You might notice one of these is harder than the other, depending on if your outer thighs are tighter than your inner thighs. Doing another 10 there, hinge to squat. Similar to the other exercise, the weight is more just keep you focused on the hinging, getting your weight in your heels. The more your weight is in your heels, the more we're going to use those hips. So now we're going to do some unweighted exercises. We're going to do that narrow first. We're going to serve the platter. The platter hands together, thumbs kind of rotating out away from each other. We're going from that, what we call a long wing position, where we're opening up the shoulders, broadening the chest there at the top, and trying to keep that chest from caving in. We'll show a couple here at the side view. Again, we're trying to push our weight. As we push the hands away, the hips are equally moving away from the elbows, and that's going to cause us to almost fall backwards. You want to be teetering there. You want to challenge yourself to drive into the heels. Your arches are going to work to keep the balls of your feet on the ground there. Very similar move. We're just going to go wide now. So instead of being narrow, open up those hips, and we're going to start always lengthening. Hands in the hip hugger position, so they're on the outer sides of the trochanter, your hips. Now we're serving that platter a little wide. So you're just serving a big old tray, a little bit high, trying to get that tray up to about eye level. And you're finding that same shift backwards, fighting. It's okay to suffer there and challenge yourself. If you're not knocking yourself off balance at least once, you're not necessarily challenging yourself. Same thing there. The hip hugger position where the hands come back by the hips is designed to open up those shoulders, broaden the chest, so when you hinge and drive the hands forward, you're not caving, and you're also not raising the shoulder blades into the ears. A lot of people want to try to get deeper into this position by rounding at the spine or extending at the spine. That's another problem too. We don't want to extend. It's all about driving with those hips. One more in slow motion. Adding tension to the hamstrings and then keeping that tension, almost like we're lifting ourselves with the hamstrings there at the end. And we didn't do it here, but if you struggle with extending your spine to bring yourself back up to standing, then do a slow 3 to 5 second pulling yourself up with your hips to the standing position instead of using your spine, that extension in that lumbar thoracic spine to bring you back. We want to keep the hips doing the work.